The jar slipped from her fingers and shattered across the kitchen floor. Glass. Liquid. 3 weeks of careful cultivation spreading across industrial tile like blood from a wound she hadn't seen coming. Adaze didn't move, didn't breathe. Just stood there in the doorway of the Seoul International Fermentation Festival's collaborative kitchen while everything she'd carried across an ocean bled out at her feet. "You're standing in it." The voice came from somewhere to her left, male, Korean, completely uninterested in her catastrophe. She turned her head slowly. A man stood at the far counter with his back to her, hands moving through something she couldn't see. He hadn't looked up, hadn't offered help, hadn't even paused in whatever he was doing. I said, "You're standing in it? The glass? You'll track it everywhere." Adaeze felt something hot climb up her chest and settle behind her eyes. 14 hours on a plane. A connection in Dubai that had nearly broken her. Her mother's voice still echoing from their last phone call. "Why are you doing this to yourself, Adaeze? What are you trying to prove?" And now this man, this stranger, telling her she was standing wrong in her own disaster. "I know where I'm standing." He made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Worse than a laugh. "Do you?" She stepped forward deliberately, glass crunching under her boots. Let it crunch. Let it track. Let this man who wouldn't even turn around understand exactly who had just walked into his space. "I'm Adaeze Okonkwo." She said it the way she said everything that mattered, like she was carving it into stone. "From Lagos. I'm your partner for the next 7 days." Now he turned, and something in her stomach did something she wasn't prepared for. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 32, 33, sharp features that would have been severe if not for the slight softness around his mouth, eyes that landed on her and stayed there with an intensity that felt like being weighed on a scale she hadn't agreed to step on to. "Junseo," he said. Nothing else. No restaurant name, no credentials, no context. Just the 2 syllables of who he was offered like they should be enough. They stood there, her in her disaster, him in his silence. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "Neither are you. What did you expect?" Adaze looked at the puddle spreading toward his station. At the jar, her grandmother's recipe, or her grandmother's method, her grandmother's hands guiding hers through the process when she was 7 years old, destroyed on a floor that didn't know what it had just absorbed. Someone who offers to help when things fall apart. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. "I don't help people I don't know." "Then I suppose we should get to know each other." "I don't do that either." He turned back to his work. Dismissed her. Actually dismissed her, like she was an interruption and not the other half of whatever they were supposed to create together. Adaeze stood in the broken glass of everything she'd brought and felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. Fine. Fine. If that's how this would be. She stepped over the mess. Her mess, she'd cleaned it herself. She didn't need anything from him. And walked to the other side of the kitchen. Her half. The half she'd been assigned in emails full of polite promises about cultural exchange and collaborative innovation. The counter was clean, sterile, waiting. She set down her bag, the one that hadn't broken, the one that held 6 more jars of Zobo concentrate, 3 varieties of dawa dawa, and enough fermented locust beans to remind her why she'd said yes to this in the first place. Behind her, Junseo's knife hit the cutting board in a rhythm that felt deliberate. Thok, thok, thok. Each strike landing was like a statement she wasn't meant to understand. She opened her bag, pulled out the first jar, set it on the counter with a sound that was louder than it should have been in this silent room. Behind her, the knife stopped. But she didn't turn around. Didn't give him the satisfaction. But she felt it. Felt him finally look, really look at what she'd brought. The deep, red-purple liquid that caught the overhead lights and threw them back transformed. At the sediment layer that told its own story about time and temperature and something alive in the darkness of the jar. The handwritten label in her grandmother's script, faded now, barely legible, but still there. Still holding. She felt him see it, and when she finally turned, slowly, like she had all the time in the world, she caught the end of something moving across his face, something unguarded, something that looked almost like recognition before he controlled it. What is that? Not a question. A demand. Adaize smiled. Not warmly. Not yet. Something you've never tasted. If you're new here, welcome to Afro-Korean Stories TV. This is where we tell the stories that bridge worlds, the ones that live in the space between what we were taught and what we discover. If this story is already pulling you in, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever met someone who challenged everything you thought you knew? I want to hear it. Now, let's continue. Day 2 began with Adaize arriving at 6 in the morning to find Junseo already there. Of course he was already there. Of course he'd made sure to arrive first, to establish himself in the space, to own it before she could claim her half. She set her things down without greeting him. Two could play this game. He was working with something pale and viscous. You're moving it between ceramic vessels with hands that knew exactly what they were doing. She watched longer than she intended. His technique was precise to the point of being hypnotic. Each movement calibrated, each gesture serving a purpose. You're staring. She looked away too quickly. Hated herself for it. I'm observing. There's a difference. Is there? He didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge her expertise. Her years, her restaurant in Lagos that had earned its reputation through work he couldn't imagine. She turned to her own station and began unpacking. The zobo needed to be checked. The temperature, the acidity, the progression of the fermentation. These were living things she'd brought, cultures that carried generations of knowledge in their bacterial makeup. She lifted the first jar, opened it. I dipped her finger in and brought it to her mouth. The taste bloomed across her tongue. Sour, complex, not ready yet, but getting there. Good, good. Behind her, Junseo made a sound. She turned. What? He was staring at her finger, at her mouth, at the jar. You taste it like that. Yes. With your hands. Yes. A pause, heavy. His expression was doing something she couldn't read. That's unsanitary. The word landed like a slap. Adaize set the jar down slowly, very slowly, giving herself time to choose her response instead of reacting with the heat building in her chest. Unsanitary. The bacteria on your skin. I know what bacteria lives on my skin. I know what lives in these jars. I know the relationship between them better than you know anything about my process. I'm simply pointing out. What you're pointing out is that my method is wrong. That's what you're saying, isn't it? That the way I do things, the way my grandmother did things, the way her mother did things, is somehow less than your sterile pipettes and your temperature-controlled chambers. Junseo's face didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I didn't say less. You said it was unsanitary. In this context, it means the same thing. Silence. He turned back to his work. She turned back to hers. The morning continued like that. Two people sharing a space, sharing a purpose, sharing nothing else. They moved around each other like opposing magnets, each aware of the other's position, in each refusing to acknowledge what that awareness meant. At noon, she checked her main fermentation vessel. The zobo was progressing, but something about the temperature felt wrong. Too cool. The bacteria were sluggish in a way that made her uneasy. She adjusted the placement, moving the vessel closer to the heated section of the counter. 20 minutes later, she returned to find it moved back. She looked at Junseo. His back was to her. He was focused on his work with the kind of concentration that felt deliberate. Did you touch my vessel? The temperature was too high. I adjusted it for a reason. Your reason was wrong. The heat in her chest flared again. Excuse me? Now he turned. His eyes met hers with a directness that felt like confrontation. What the optimal fermentation temperature for that type of culture is between... I know what the optimal temperature is. Clearly you don't, or you wouldn't have. My zobo doesn't ferment the same way your gochujang does. The bacteria are different. The substrate is different. Everything about what I'm doing is different from what you've studied in your labs and your research papers. Fermentation has universal principles. Fermentation has context, history, memory. She stepped toward him, and she saw something shift in his posture, not quite retreat, but awareness. These cultures came from my grandmother's kitchen. They've been alive for 47 years. They know things that your science doesn't have words for. That's mysticism. It's knowledge, the kind that doesn't fit on a graph. They stood close now. Too close. She could see the texture of his skin, the slight irregularity in the shape of his left eyebrow, the way his breath came slightly faster than it should for someone standing still. Move my vessel again, she said quietly, and we'll have a problem. He didn't answer, didn't move, just looked at her with something in his expression that she couldn't name and didn't want to. She turned away first. It felt like losing something, but she did it anyway. The afternoon passed in cold efficiency. She moved her vessel back. He didn't touch it again. But she felt his eyes on her work, felt him tracking her process with an attention that bordered on surveillance. By evening, she was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical labor. Day 3 broke something open. It started small, a disagreement about counter space. He'd spread his equipment further than his half. She'd called him on it. He'd dismissed her concern with a wave of his hand that made her vision blur with anger. "This isn't your restaurant," she said, and her voice was louder than she'd intended. Louder than this kitchen was designed for. The sound bounced off the metal surfaces and came back to her transformed. "It isn't yours either. I never claimed it was, but you're acting like what? Like I'm an intrusion, like I don't belong here." Junseo set down his tools. The care with which he did it made her more nervous than if he'd slammed them. You want to know what I think? I want to know why you've treated me like a problem since the moment I walked in. Because this festival... He paused. His jaw worked. This festival invited me to create something that represents the future of fermentation, something innovative, something that matters, and then they paired me with... With what? Say it. His eyes found hers and held. With someone who thinks tradition is enough, who thinks 47-year-old bacteria cultures and grandmother's recipes are innovation. The words hit her like stones, each one landing in a place that was already bruised. "You think I'm here to perform authenticity," she said slowly. "You think I'm a prop. Something to make your modern techniques look even more impressive by contrast. I didn't say... You've been saying it since I arrived. Every look, every correction, every moment of treating my knowledge like folklore instead of science." She stepped toward him again. Close. Closer than was smart. "Let me tell you something about tradition, Junseo. Let me tell you what lives in those jars you keep looking at like they're curiosities." Her voice had dropped. Quiet now. Dangerous. "My grandmother couldn't read. Did you know that's possible? To hold knowledge that complex, that precise, that scientifically sophisticated without ever learning to read a word?" She knew the exact moment a fermentation was ready by sound, by smell, by the way the light came through the liquid. She knew things your instruments can't measure because they don't have sensors for memory. I'm not finished." He went still. She passed that knowledge to my mother, who added to it, who brought her own understanding, her own innovations, her own decades of watching and listening and tasting with her hands. And my mother passed it to me, not through books, not through research papers, through time, through presence, through watching me fail and teaching me why. Adaizi's chest was heaving now. She could feel tears building behind her eyes, and she hated it, hated that he could see this, hated that he was watching her with an expression she couldn't decode. When you dismiss what I know, she continued, you're not just dismissing me, you're dismissing them. You're dismissing every woman who stood in a kitchen and understood things that men in laboratories would take another century to discover. You're dismissing. She stopped. The words had run out. Or maybe there were too many of them crowding her throat, making it impossible to choose. Junseo stood completely still. His face had gone strange, blank in a way that felt like armor. My grandmother, he said slowly, raised me after my parents died. She taught me everything, not in a laboratory, in her kitchen, with her hands, with sounds and smells and light through liquid. Adaize felt something cold move through her. I know what knowledge lives in the hands of women who can't read, he continued. I know it better than you assume. And when I correct your technique, when I adjust your temperature, when I push back against your methods, it isn't because I think tradition is worthless. He stepped closer, so close she could count the seconds between his breaths. It's because I know what happens when tradition refuses to evolve, when it becomes a monument instead of a living thing. I watched my grandmother spend her last years unable to pass on what she knew because no one would bridge the gap between her knowledge and the language the world needed to hear it in. His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. She died, and it died with her, because no one, because I didn't, figure out how to translate it in time. Silence. Something in the kitchen had shifted. The air felt different, heavier. You translate tradition into science, Adaize said slowly. You quantify it, measure it. I give it words the world respects. Yes, and I keep it alive by keeping it whole, by not dissecting it, by trusting that the way is part of the meaning. Yes. They looked at each other, really looked, for the first time since she'd arrived. We're doing the same thing, she said. We're doing opposite things. Maybe that's the same thing. He didn't answer, but something in his face had opened. Just a crack, just enough to let something else through. Then he turned and walked out of the kitchen. She stood alone with 16 jars of Zobo that weren't progressing the way she needed it to. Stood alone with the echo of his voice, his words about his grandmother, his pain that matched hers in ways she hadn't expected. The silence he left behind was worse than any argument. That night, Anadaz called Lagos. Her sous chef answered on the third ring. Chef, what time is it there? Late, early, I don't know. Chidinma's voice softened. That bad? Adayaz sat on her hotel bed, looking at the city lights of Seoul through curtains she hadn't bothered to close, 14 floors up. Everything small and far away. I don't know what I'm doing here, Chidi. You're representing us. You're showing them what Nigerian fermentation can be. I'm fighting with a man who thinks I'm a relic. Then show him you're not. It's not that simple. It's never simple. That's why you're the one there and not someone else. Adazi closed her eyes. The restaurant is fine. We're fine. Chef Bola is handling the kitchen like you never left, which, if I'm being honest, is slightly offensive to both of us. A laugh. Small and tired. The Zobo isn't developing right, Adaize admitted. The cultures are struggling. I think it's the water here, or the air, or something I can't identify. What would your grandmother say? The question hit her harder than it should. She'd say the bacteria know more than I do. She'd say to listen instead of push. So listen. I'm trying. No, chef, you're fighting. You always fight first. Listen comes later, sometimes too late. A daze opened her eyes. The city blurred through unexpected tears. When did you get so wise? When you left me in charge of the kitchen, I'm not ready to run. You're ready. I know, but I like making you say it. After they hung up, Daisy sat in the silence of her hotel room and thought about listening. About what her grandmother would do faced with cultures that weren't cooperating, about what it meant to work with something living instead of trying to force it into the shape you needed, about Junseo and his grandmother and the knowledge that had died because no one bridged the gap in time. She got dressed, left the hotel, walked through Seoul's midnight streets until she found herself back at the festival kitchen. The lights were on. Through the window, she could see him. Junseo, standing at his counter, working with something in the half-darkness. His movements are slower than during the day, less precise, more searching. She should leave, come back in the morning, pretend this never happened. Instead, she opened the door. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders shifted in a way that told her he knew she was there. I couldn't sleep either, she said. Nothing. He kept working. She walked to her station. Her jars were where she'd left them. The Zobo is still sluggish, still struggling, still not quite right. The water here is different, he said suddenly, not turning, not looking. I know. Higher mineral content, different pH, your cultures are adjusting. I know. They need time you don't have. She felt it again, that flare of defensiveness, but this time she let it pass. Let it go through her instead of stopping in her chest. What would you suggest? Now he turned. His face was strange in the half-light. Younger, somehow. Less defended. Come here. She walked to his side of the kitchen. Stood next to him at his counter for the first time since she'd arrived. He was working with a pale, almost translucent liquid, moving it between vessels with hands that looked different up close. Scarred, weathered, hands that had spent years doing this exact thing. This is Makeali's starter, he said, but a variation. My grandmother's variation. The culture is 213 years old. Adis looked at the liquid, at the subtle movements within it, the life that wasn't visible but was undeniably present. 213 years. Passed from woman to woman in my family. My grandmother was the last woman. She gave it to me because there was no one else. He dipped a finger in, tasted it. She watched his face as he processed what the culture told him. The water here is different, he said again, but the culture remembers other waters, other places, other hands. He looked at her. Your cultures will remember too, or they just need to be reminded of what they already know. Adaisi felt something shift in her chest. Not the hot defensiveness of before. Something else, something quieter. Show me. He showed her. One small technique. A way of warming the vessels with the heat of the hands instead of external temperature. A way of speaking to the culture through touch. She watched his hands, the way they curved around the ceramic, the patience in each movement. My grandmother did this, she said quietly. Not exactly the same, but the principle, the relationship. Yes, I'd forgotten. I used thermometers now. Equipment. Equipment isn't wrong, it's just not complete. They stood in the half-dark kitchen. The smell of fermentation surrounded them. His cultures, hers. Both living, both doing their slow, invisible work. I want to show you something, she said. She walked to her station, brought back one of the Zobo jars, the best one, the one that was closest to what it should be. Open it, she said. He hesitated. Then his hands took the jar and she watched him open it with the same care he showed his own cultures. He smelled it first, eyes closed, taking in the layers. Then he tasted, finger to liquid to mouth, the same way she did, the way his grandmother must have done. His face did something unguarded. Something real moved across his features before he could control it. "Your grandmother taught you this?" he asked quietly, not looking at her, looking at the jar in his hands. Adaze didn't answer immediately. The question felt bigger than it was. The answer is more important. "My grandmother," she said finally, and her voice was different now, "taught me that fermentation isn't something you do. It's something you join, a process already happening. A conversation has already started. She said the bacteria don't need us. We need them, and the best we can do is listen well enough to become part of what they're doing." Seoul looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, neither of them was defending anything. "She sounds like my grandmother," he said. Maybe they knew the same things, different languages, same knowledge. Maybe that's what we're supposed to find here. Maybe. The word hung between them, uncertain, possible. If this story is speaking to something in you, if you've ever felt what it's like to have your knowledge dismissed or to realize you were dismissing someone else's, take a moment. Or subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment about who taught you what you know, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We're not alone in these stories. Now, let's keep going. Day 5 began differently. Adaze arrived at 7. Junseo was already there, but this time he turned when she entered. This time something passed between them that wasn't hostility. "The Zobo cultures," he said. "They've shifted." She went to her station. He was right. The liquid had changed color overnight, deeper now, more complex. The sediment layer had organized itself differently. The smell when she opened the jar was richer, more developed, closer to what she needed. "How did you know?" "I checked them earlier." "You checked my culture?" He met her eyes. "I checked them. Nothing has changed." "Nah, just looked." She waited for the flare of defensiveness. It didn't come. "What did you see?" "Progress. Your grandmother's method, combined with the warming technique. The cultures are adjusting faster." Adaze looked at the jars. Something like hope moved through her. "We have 2 days," she said. "I know. The dish isn't ready. We haven't even agreed on what it is." "I know. So, what do we do?" Junseo walked toward her, stopped at the invisible boundary that had divided their kitchen since she arrived. "What does your tradition say about collision? About 2 things that shouldn't work together finding a way?" Adaze thought about her grandmother, about Lagos, about generations of women who had learned to make something out of combinations that others said were impossible. "My tradition says everything ferments differently together than it does alone. The chemistry changes, the cultures communicate. Sometimes they kill each other. Sometimes they create something that neither could make separately. My tradition says the same thing. Then maybe we stop working in parallel." "Maybe." She stepped toward him, crossed the boundary. He didn't move back. "Show me what you're making," she said. "All of it, not just the parts you think I'll understand. Show me yours." At the same time? A pause, almost a smile. "Is there another way?" They worked side by side, not in silence now, in conversation. She explained her zobo, the hibiscus flowers, the ginger, the sugar that fed the fermentation and transformed in the process. He explained his Magyoli variation, the rice, the nuruk, and the specific strain of bacteria that had been in his family for centuries. They tasted each other's work, properly, with respect and attention and the kind of analysis that came from genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "The acidity," he said, tasting her zobo again. "It could work with the sweetness of the makgeolli, a kind of balance." "Not balance," she said. "Tension. The best dishes don't balance. They hold opposites together without resolving them. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. That's what my grandmother said. Exactly that. Maybe there's only one truth, just different words for it. They worked through the morning. By noon, they had something. Not the final dish, but a direction, a possibility. His cultures and hers, by moving toward each other in a way that felt like the beginning of conversation. A festival photographer came in around 2, a young woman with careful eyes and a camera that clicked quietly. The collaborative pairs, she explained. We're documenting the process for the festival archive. She photographed them separately first, then together. Move closer, she said. You're supposed to be collaborating. They moved closer. No, really collaborating. Show me what you do. Junseo glanced at Adaeze. She glanced back. They turned to the counter, started working, not performing, actually working. The photographer circled them, her camera catching moments Adaeze wasn't aware of. At one point, Junseo reached past her for a vessel. His arm brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. At another point, she handed him a jar without him asking. Their fingers touched on the glass. The photographer kept clicking. Keep capturing. When she left, Adaeze realized she couldn't remember exactly what had been photographed. Only that she'd been working with Junseo, really with him for the first time. And that something about it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. By evening, they had a problem. Adaeze tasted the combined batch, the first true integration of their cultures, and her face must have shown what she found. Junseo looked at her. What? Taste it. He did. His face changed the same way hers had. The acid, he said. Too sharp. It's fighting the makgeolli instead of joining it. We adjusted the ratio. It's not the ratio. It's something else. Something I can't identify. They looked at the vessel, at weeks of work, at the collision that was happening inside and not the way they'd hoped. We have 2 days, Adaeze said. I know. So we start over. He looked at her. Something passed between them that wasn't about fermentation. Together this time, she said. A pause. Together this time. Day 6 began at 4 in the morning. They had agreed to meet early, to give the new batch every possible hour to develop before the festival opened the next day. Adaeze arrived to find Junseo already at the counter with every vessel, every culture, every ingredient they had spread before him. You haven't slept, she said. Neither have you. They got to work. This time was different. There was no boundary in the kitchen, not his side and her side. Just 2 people moving through the same space, reaching past each other, speaking in a language that had developed over the past 5 days without either of them noticing. By mid-morning, they had something. Not complete, but alive in the right way. The cultures were talking to each other. She could see it, smell it, feel it when she held her hands near the vessel. This is it, she said. Junseo tasted it. His eyes closed. His face did something she had learned to read over these past days. The slight softening around his mouth that meant approval. The lift of his eyebrows meant surprise. The deeper something that meant he was moved in ways he didn't want to show. This is it, he agreed. They stood together looking at what they'd made, at the impossible combination that was now, somehow, possible. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. A news alert. A preview article about the festival. She read it. And everything stopped. What is it? Junseo asked. She handed him the phone. He read it. She watched his face change, watched the softness disappear, watched something cold and hard move into its place. The article was by Kim Young-jun, a food journalist with a reputation for cruelty disguised as criticism. He had written a preview of the festival's collaborative pairs. About Adaeze and Junseo, he had written, The pairing of Jun Seo with a Nigerian chef feels less like cultural exchange than cultural tourism. One wonders what the acclaimed Korean fermentation scientist could possibly learn from traditions that have produced no global recognition. This is innovation dressed as authenticity, in Western curiosity wearing an African mask. He hadn't named her. That was almost worse. Adize took her phone back, read the words again, let them settle into her body like poison. "He doesn't understand what we're doing," Jun Seo said. She didn't answer. "Adize, he's wrong." "Is he?" "Yes. The Zobo isn't globally recognized. The techniques aren't published in journals. The traditions don't have the vocabulary that the food world respects. That doesn't mean... It means everything." Her voice was quiet now. The dangerous quiet that wasn't anger. "It means that no matter what we make in here, no matter how good it is, people like him will see exactly what he wrote. A gimmick, a curiosity. Something interesting but ultimately lesser." "You can't believe that." "I don't have to believe it. It's true. It's been true my whole career. Every time I stand in a room with chefs from Paris, from Tokyo, from Copenhagen, I see it in their eyes. Interest, but not respect. Never quite respect." She walked to her station, started putting her jars in their cases. "What are you doing?" "Packing. You can't leave." "I can do whatever I want. We have a dish. We have work that matters. The work doesn't matter if the world has already decided what it sees." Her hands were steady as she packed, steadier than her heart. "I came here to prove something, to show that my tradition belongs at the same table as theirs. But I can't make people see what they've decided not to look at." Jun Seo watched her pack. Then he did something nobody who knew him would expect. He took out his phone, dialed a number, put it on speaker. "Jun Seo si." A man's voice, oily, self-satisfied. "I didn't expect to hear from you today. Did you read my little preview?" "I read it." "And? I thought I was quite generous, actually. Your reputation is still intact. I didn't blame you for the pairing. Kim Yong-jun, I want to be very clear about what I'm about to say. Clear enough that you understand this isn't a casual observation." Something in Jun Seo's voice had changed. Adiz stopped packing. "The chef I'm working with," Jun Seo continued, "has more knowledge of fermentation in her smallest finger than you have in your entire bloated career of writing about food you don't understand. The cultures she's brought from Lagos are 2 generations older than anything I've ever worked with. The techniques she uses are sophisticated enough that it took me 5 days to even begin to understand their precision." "Now, wait just a... I'm not finished." Silence on the other end. "You called this collaboration a gimmick. Cultural tourism. Let me tell you what it actually is. It's the first time in my career that I've worked with someone who challenged every assumption I had about fermentation. Every assumption. Not because she's different, but because she's ahead. Ahead of me. Ahead of you. Ahead of anyone who thinks innovation only comes from laboratories and published papers. Jun Seo, I think you're being emotional. Tomorrow, when the festival opens, you'll taste what we've made. And when you do, I expect you to write another article. One that tells the truth. That you were wrong. That you were too small to see something larger than your own vocabulary allowed. Can you do that? This is highly unprofessional. Can you do that? A long pause. We'll see what the dish tastes like, Kim Yong-jun said finally. Yes, we will. Jun Seo hung up. He turned around. Adize was looking at him like she'd never seen him before, because she hadn't. Not this version of him. Not someone who would risk his professional reputation, his relationships, his standing in a community that valued politeness above all else. For her. Why did you do that? He met her eyes. Because he was wrong. That's not a reason. It's the only reason that matters. They stood there. The kitchen is quiet around them, the vessel of their collaborative work fermenting slowly in the background. And the world outside is still spinning with all its judgments and assumptions and limited vocabulary. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. It will cost you." "I know that too." "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Softer, more uncertain than she'd ever heard it. "Because you were going to leave. And if you left, I wouldn't—" He stopped, started again. "The dish wouldn't work without you." "The dish?" "Yes, just the dish." He didn't answer, but his eyes said something that his words weren't ready for. "Unpack your jars," he said finally. "Please, we have work to finish." Adaze looked at him for a long moment. Then she unpacked her jars. Day 7, the festival. Adaze woke at dawn, didn't remember sleeping. Yeah, the day ahead felt larger than any day she'd ever faced. She dressed carefully, not in chef's whites, in something from Lagos, something her mother had given her before she left, the colors of home, the patterns that told their own story. Junseo was waiting outside the kitchen when she arrived. He looked at her outfit, didn't say anything, but something in his face softened. They entered together. The dish had been developing overnight, the final fermentation, the last crucial hours, where everything either came together or fell apart. Junseo opened the vessel. The smell that emerged made both of them go still. It was right. Better than right. It was something neither of them could have made alone. Something that held both their traditions in a way that didn't erase either one. "Taste it," Adaze said. He did, but his eyes closed. When he opened them, they were wet. "My grandmother," he said quietly. "She's in there. I can taste her." "And mine," Adaze said. "They're talking to each other." "Yes." They stood together looking at what they'd made. Generations of women who had never met, meeting now in a clay vessel in a kitchen in Seoul. The festival hall was crowded. Chefs and critics and food lovers from around the world, all gathered to taste what the collaborative pairs had created. Their table was near the back, a small card with both their names, a description of the dish that didn't come close to capturing what it was. The first visitors approached, tasted. Their faces changed. "What is this?" a woman asked, in English, heavy with a French accent. "What did you do?" "We listened," Adaze said, or to what the bacteria already knew. More visitors, more faces are changing, more questions they couldn't quite answer because the answer was in the taste, not the words. Kim Yong-jun arrived around noon. He stood at a distance watching. Adaze saw him and felt her body tense. Junseo's hand brushed hers. Just briefly, just enough to ground her. The journalist approached, tasted. His face did something complicated. He said nothing, walked away. By afternoon, word had spread. The line at their table was the longest in the hall. People were photographing the dish, recording videos, asking questions about cultures and traditions, and what it meant to find collaboration across distances that were supposed to be uncrossable. The photographer from day 5 appeared with her camera. I showed them a print of one of the photos she'd taken. It was the moment when Junseo had reached past Adaze for the vessel, his arm across her space, her face turned toward his work. Both of them were so focused that they'd forgotten the camera was there. The photo looked like trust, like discovery, like something unnamed that had been building all week. "Can I keep this?" Adaze asked. "It's yours," the photographer said. "Both of yours." After, when the crowds had thinned and the festival hall began its slow emptying, they returned to the kitchen. Just them. The jars being packed up, the counter being cleaned, the space returning to what it had been before they'd transformed it into something else. Adaze was flying back to Lagos in the morning, They both knew this, had been aware of it all day without speaking about it. "The dish worked," Junseo said. "Yes." "More than worked." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. She kept packing, though her hands were slower than they needed to be. "What happens now?" he asked. "I go home. You stay here. The festival ends. Life continues." "Is that what you want?" She stopped packing. "What I want isn't the question." "It should be." She turned to face him. He was standing at his counter but looking at her, all of his attention, all of his focus, directed at her in a way that made her breath catch. "What do you want?" she asked. He took a long time to answer. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. "I want to understand more of what you know, of what your grandmother knew, and of how the traditions you carry connect to things I haven't discovered yet. You want to study me?" "No." He stepped closer. "I want to learn from you. There's a difference." "Is there?" "You know there is." She did know. She had learned the difference this week in ways she hadn't expected. "And?" she asked. "Is that all you want?" His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "That's not all I want." The kitchen was very still. The smell of fermentation surrounded them, their cultures, their work, their week, and she realized she didn't want to leave. Not the kitchen, not Seoul, not him. "I have a restaurant in Lagos," she said. "I know. A reputation. A life. People who depend on me. I know. I can't just stay." "I'm not asking you to stay." "Then what are you asking?" He closed the distance between them, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the vulnerability he wasn't hiding anymore. "I'm asking what you want," he said. "Not what's possible, not what's practical. Just what you want, right now, at this moment, before anything else becomes relevant." A daze looked at him, at this man who had dismissed her and defended her, who had challenged everything she knew and then stood beside her while she challenged everything he knew, who had called a journalist and burned his own bridges because she had been about to walk away. "I want more time," she said. "We don't have more time." "I know." "So what do we do with the time we have?" She reached out, touched his hand, just briefly, and just enough to feel that he was real, that this was real, that the past week hadn't been something she'd imagined in the loneliness of a hotel room far from home. "We stay here," she said, "for a few more hours. We don't pack anything. We don't make plans. We just stay." He turned his hand under hers, his fingers interlaced with hers. The first time they'd touched deliberately, intentionally, without the excuse of jars or vessels or work. And then? And then we figure out what the bacteria know. What they've known all along. Which is? She looked at him. At this man who had been a stranger 8 days ago and was now something she couldn't name, something that had fermented between them, slow and invisible and transformative. "That every good culture needs time," she said. "Time and the right conditions. Need time and something worth waiting for." He smiled. Really smiled. For the first time since she'd known him. "My grandmother would have liked you," he said. "Mine would have liked you too, eventually, after she tested you." "What would the test be?" "Tasting her zobo and telling her what you found. Every note, every layer, every generation of hands that had shaped it." "I could do that." "I know. That's why she would have liked you." They stood together in the kitchen, their hands still intertwined, the jars still packed and unpacked and waiting. Outside, Seoul continued its nighttime hum. Inside, something new was beginning. "If this story moved you," If you recognized something in these two people who found each other across impossible distances, then you're part of this community now. The Afro-Korean Stories TV is where we tell these stories together. The ones about collision and discovery and what happens when you let someone see the parts of you that you protect most carefully. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment telling me your story, and share this with someone who needs to know that the distance between what we were taught and what we discover is never as far as it seems. The airport was crowded. Lagos-bound travelers, Seoul-bound memories, 1,000 stories intersecting in a terminal that didn't know any of them. Adaeze stood at the gate with her bags packed and her heart somewhere behind her, in a kitchen that still smelled like zobo and macchioli, and something that had only just begun. He had driven her here, had carried her bags, that had stood with her in the terminal for as long as he could, saying nothing and everything at once. At the security checkpoint, they had stopped. "This isn't goodbye," he said. "I know. I'm coming to Lagos next month to see your restaurant, to taste your grandmother's zobo in the place where it belongs. You'll hate the heat, probably, and the traffic. Definitely. And my mother will interrogate you. I'm prepared." She looked at him, at this man who had become necessary to her in a way she still didn't fully understand. "What do I tell people?" she asked. "When they ask what happened in Seoul, tell them you made a dish. Is that what happened? Isn't it?" She smiled, reached up and touched his face, just briefly, just enough to memorize the texture of him. "No," she said. "Oh, that's not what happened." "Then what?" She leaned in, close enough to whisper. "The bacteria taught us something," she said, "about collisions, about time, about what happens when two things that shouldn't work together stop fighting and start listening. What happens? Something new, something that neither one could make alone." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a long story to tell people at a security checkpoint." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. "Then I'll keep it simple," she said. "I'll tell them I met someone who made me better at what I do, someone I'm not finished learning from yet. And if they ask what's next..." She picked up her bags, looked at him one last time before stepping into the line for security. "Then I'll tell them the truth," she said. That the fermentation isn't done, that it takes as long as it takes, that the best cultures are the ones you keep feeding, keep tending, keep trusting to become what they're meant to become. And what are we meant to become? The question hung between them, too big for an airport, too important for a goodbye. She smiled. "We don't know yet," she said. "That's the whole point." Then she turned and walked toward the future that was waiting. Behind her, Junseo watched until she disappeared into the crowd. He pulled out his phone, typed a message. "The cultures arrived safely. I'll send updates every day. They miss you already. So do I." Her reply came before he reached his car. "Good. Keep them warm. I'll be back for them, and for you." He sat in the parking lot for a long time after that, looking at the message, at the 3 little words she'd added at the end. And for you. The bacteria knew things that science couldn't measure. So did they. What the Bacteria Knows, written by Afro-Korean Stories TV, an original production. All characters are fictional.